Welcome to training number 6 in our Women's Leadership Support Network series. This is Executive Presence, Owning the Room. Now, we've talked about confidence and we've talked about imposter syndrome, but this training is about the signal that we send before we even speak, what people feel in the room when we walk in. That signal is what many refer to as executive presence. But here's the truth. Executive presence is one of the most misunderstood and misjudged concepts in leadership. And for far too long, it's been defined by outdated ideas. Who speaks the loudest or who commands the most attention, who fits the mold of a traditional leader. That mold wasn't made with most of us in mind. So today we're going to redefine what it means to own the room, not by performing a version of leadership that doesn't fit, but by developing the clarity, calm, and confidence that come with knowing exactly who you are and what you bring to the table. This session will help you identify the invisible expectations that shape how presence is judged, especially for women, and give you real tools to show up with grounded authority, whether you're leading a team, presenting to stakeholders, or navigating a difficult conversation. So let's get started. Let's start by going over our learning objectives. By the end of this training, you'll have an understanding of what executive presence is and how it's often misjudged, especially for women and non-traditional leaders. We'll also learn the 5 elements of the POISE framework and how each of the elements contributes to leadership impact. We'll explore common scenarios where presence is challenged and develop self-awareness around our own responses. And then we're going to challenge some myths and misconceptions that create internal and external barriers to presence. We'll apply practical tools and language to build presence in meetings, conversations, and moments of visibility. And then finally, we'll reflect on how to cultivate presence from a place of authenticity, not performance. Let's begin by grounding this topic in your own experience. I'd like you to think about a time where you did own the room, or maybe a time where you didn't. What helped you feel confident and in command? Or what got in your way? How did others respond to your presence or your absence of it? And what would it look like to fully embody the presence that you know you're capable of? Executive presence isn't about becoming someone else. It's about removing the noise that tells us that we're too much or not enough or hard to define. It's about making your presence felt without shrinking, overperforming, or second-guessing. What is executive presence? Executive presence is often described as a you-know-it-when-you-see-it quality, but that vagueness is part of the problem. When something is hard to define, it's easy to misjudge and even easier to gatekeep. At its core, executive presence is the ability to inspire confidence in your competence, your character, and your capacity to lead. It's not about charisma or being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being grounded, clear, and intentional in the way you carry yourself, communicate, and connect with others. According to the research by the Center for Talent Innovation, executive presence is made up of 3 primary dimensions: gravitas, how you act under pressure; communication, how clearly and effectively you speak; and appearance, how you show up, polished, composed, and aligned with context. But let's unpack this further because these categories can be misapplied, especially to women and marginalized leaders. Gravitas is often equated with seriousness or stoicism, but true gravitas is about calm authority. It's how you hold space when stakes are high. Do you stay composed when challenged? Do you project credibility when others are uncertain? Gravitas isn't about never showing emotion. It's about being emotionally intelligent enough to know when and how to respond. Now, communication includes tone, pace, word choice, and the courage to pause. It's not just about what you say, it's how you say it. Women are often caught in a double bind here. Too direct, and we're called abrasive. Too warm, and we're seen as weak. The real skill is learning how to be both clear and kind, assertive and collaborative. Executive presence means your words land with purpose. Now, appearance matters, but not in the way we've been taught. This is not about conforming to a dress code rooted in outdated norms. It's about showing up in a way that aligns with your role, your values, and the moment. Do you look like you respect the room you're in and yourself? Do you carry yourself with intention? That's presence. Executive presence is not something you're born with. It's a learned skill set, and it's deeply tied to how others perceive your credibility, readiness, and influence. But perception is shaped by bias, and that's where the trouble begins. When Stacey Abrams stood at the podium to deliver the Democratic response to the 2019 State of the Union, millions were watching, but not just to hear her words. They were watching to see how she would carry the moment. Abrams, then the former minority leader of Georgia House of Representatives, was no stranger to being underestimated. She had already made history as the first Black woman to be nominated for governor by a major party. But even with her resume, brilliance, and clarity of message, questions swirled around her look, her tone, and her readiness for national leadership. In interviews and behind-the-scenes coverage, Abrams revealed the pressure she felt to perform executive presence, while also rejecting the idea that she had to mimic traditional models of authority to be seen as credible. For years, she had been told to straighten her hair, lower her voice, dress differently, or soften her tone. And yet she found that the more she modeled herself to meet others' comfort, she felt more disconnected from her own power. She learned that the only way that she could truly lead was to fully be herself. Instead of chasing a scripted version of presence, Abrams decided to cultivate her own, grounded, intentional, clear, and unapologetically authentic. She embraced her natural voice, firm but warm. She wore bold colors that reflected her heritage and confidence, and she stopped trying to shrink herself to fit the expectations that were never made for her. What changed wasn't her capability. It was her ownership of how she wanted to show up. And that presence, rooted in purpose rather than performance, captured the attention of the nation. Today, Stacey Abrams is widely recognized not just for her policy work and advocacy, but for her ability to command a room with calm conviction. She's a reminder that executive presence isn't about checking boxes. It's about knowing who you are, standing in that truth, and letting that truth speak before you say a single word. Her story challenges the myth that presence has to look a certain way to be effective. As Abram proves, the most powerful presence is the one that doesn't apologize for existing. Executive presence is often cited as a critical factor in leadership potential, but it's also one of the most subjective and inconsistently applied criteria, especially for women. Let's look at some examples. The double standard. A confident man is seen as assertive and decisive. A confident woman, she's often labeled as aggressive or too much. Men who speak with authority are called strong. Women who do the same are often told to watch their tone. Then there's the likability trap. Research consistently shows that as women exhibit more leadership traits, competence, decisiveness, ambition, their likability often drops. This is known as the likability penalty. The very qualities that make someone a strong leader can cause others to perceive her as less warm, less approachable, and therefore less promotable. Then there's the communication bias. Women are interrupted more frequently than men in meetings. Their ideas may be overlooked until a male colleague restates them. Vocal tone, speech patterns, and body language are more harshly judged. For example, A woman with a naturally high-pitched or soft-spoken voice may be perceived as less authoritative, regardless of her content. A woman who pauses to reflect is seen as uncertain. A man who pauses is considered thoughtful. There's the appearance tightrope. Women are often judged on appearance in ways their male counterparts are not. Too polished? You're trying too hard. Too casual? You're not leadership material. What's considered appropriate can shift based on race, age, body type, and cultural background. Black and brown women in particular are disproportionately scrutinized for hairstyles, attire, and expressions of identity that fall outside the white dominant norms. And then finally, there's the catch-22 of visibility. To be considered for leadership, you need to be more visible. But when women speak up, take charge, or self-promote, they often risk social or professional backlash. The result? Many women pull back, not because they lack presence, but because they've learned it can cost them. All of this adds up to a painful paradox. Women are told they need executive presence to advance, but the more they display it, the more resistance they may face. This is why redefining executive presence matters. It's not about telling women to fix how they show up. It's about recognizing and challenging the bias in how presence is perceived, developed, and rewarded. Executive presence is often taught as a fixed image. Polished, confident, commanding, but who defined that image? And who was it built for? The traditional gravitas communication appearance triad has served as a baseline for years, but for many women, and especially women of color, LGBTQ+ leaders, and those who don't fit the dominant mold, this model can feel like a performance rather than a presence. So let's shift that lens. Instead of chasing outdated definitions, we're introducing a modern, inclusive framework for executive presence. One that's grounded in authenticity, clarity, and relational influence. We call it poise. This isn't about acting like a leader. It's about learning how to embody leadership with confidence and intention. So let's go over the 5 elements of poise. The first one is the P, presence of mind. This is staying grounded under pressure. This is how you manage yourself in the moment. This is your internal anchor. When things get stressful, when the stakes are high or the room is tense, do you go into over-explaining mode or people-pleasing or maybe even shut down? Or can you just pause, breathe, and choose your response? Presence of mind isn't about being emotionless. It's about being emotionally intelligent. It's the ability to self-regulate, recenter, and remain clear when others are reactive. What does this sound like? You might say something like, I hear your concern. Let me take a moment to think about that. Now the second is O, ownership of voice. Speak with clarity and conviction. How you express your thoughts and lead conversations is your ownership of voice. Women are often told to speak up, but then when they do, we get feedback like, you need to be more confident, and then you're too intense as a result. Ownership of voice means learning to trust your perspective, release our over-apologizing, and speak in a way that reflects our authority, not just expertise. This includes dropping hedging phrases like, I just think, or I could be wrong, but, and replacing them with intentional language that communicates belief in your ideas. What does this sound like? Well, I recommend we explore another option. Or, I disagree and here's why. That's ownership of voice. The I stands for intentional energy, shaping the space that we're in. This is what your presence feels like to others. And every leader carries a kind of energy into the room. Is yours calm and clear or anxious and overactive? Do you project alignment or are you trying to prove something? Intentional energy is about choosing how you show up, not performatively, but consciously. This isn't about being an extrovert. Quiet confidence is just as powerful as charisma. What matters is that your energy matches your message and that people feel your clarity, not your self-doubt. What does this feel like? Well, people feel steadier after talking to you than they did before. Now, S stands for signature style. This is aligning your look with your leadership, how you visually and physically show up. Now, I'd like you to forget about rigid dress codes and style policing. Signature style isn't about conformity, it's about alignment. It's the way you carry yourself, dress, and express your leadership identity in a way that's both contextually appropriate and also true to who you are. Whether you lead in heels or hiking boots, or whether your blazer is buttoned or boldly colored, does your style reflect your presence? Are you showing up in a way that says, I take myself seriously and I take this space seriously too? What this looks like is posture that communicates strength, clothing that reflects your intentionality, and expressions that are congruent with your message. Now finally, the E, it stands for empathetic authority. This is leading with both strength and care. This is how you hold space and influence others with trust. This is the capstone of the model. Empathetic authority is the ability to lead with both backbone and heart. You don't dominate the room, but you also don't disappear in it. You listen deeply. You acknowledge others. You speak truth, even hard truth, with respect and resolve. Empathetic authority means you know how to hold boundaries and build bridges. It's the kind of leadership that earns respect, not demands it. What does this feel like to others? I feel safe, challenged, and seen in her presence. So executive presence isn't about changing who you are. It's about removing what's in the way of who you're being fully seen and felt as. With poise, you're no longer measuring yourself against someone else's mold. Instead, we're learning how to lead with intention, not imitation. Whether you're leading a team or still building your path, executive presence isn't about having a title. It's about how you show up in key moments that shape perception. It's in how you carry yourself, how you communicate under pressure, and how others experience you, especially when decisions are being made about your potential, even when you're not in the room. So here are 5 everyday moments where executive presence makes a difference and how it can be developed at any career stage. The first is speaking up in a meeting. So our challenge might be that we're the newest voice at the table. You have an idea, but you hesitate. What if it's wrong? What if no one listens? Well, presence doesn't require certainty. It requires courage. When you speak up with clarity, even briefly, you begin to shift how others perceive your value. Have you ever stayed silent in a meeting, even when you had something to contribute? What stopped you? The second is managing conflict or pushback. Maybe you disagree with a colleague or you feel dismissed, but worry that addressing it might make you seem combative or difficult. Well, presence isn't about being agreeable. It's about being grounded. The ability to calmly hold your point of view under pressure builds long-term respect. So think about a time when you were challenged. Did you shrink back, over-explain, or stand your ground? What would you do differently now? The third is introducing yourself or your work. Maybe you're asked to share your background or describe a project. Do you downplay it? Do you rush through it? Or do you default to the, I'm just lucky? The way you talk about your work shapes how others value it. Executive presence begins with how you frame your own narrative. What's one thing that you're proud of that you tend to minimize when you speak? Why do you do that? So here's the fourth area where your presence matters most, and that's virtual settings and remote work. So say you're on Zoom and everybody has their cameras off and everyone's voices are muted. How do you build your presence when you're a box on a screen? Presence is more than physical. It's about engagement, the tone of your voice, your responsiveness, and how you show up on camera or off camera can signal leadership readiness, even in silence. So what signals are you sending virtually? Are they aligned with the leader you want to be seen as? Finally, we have moments of recognition or visibility. Now, maybe you're given credit or put in the spotlight, but you immediately shift it to others or you brush it off. Humility is powerful, but visibility matters. Practicing how to receive recognition without deflecting reinforces confidence, not arrogance. So what's your default response to praise? What would it look like to simply say, "Thank you, I worked hard on that"? You don't need a title to develop presence. The way you show up in small daily interactions shapes how others perceive your potential and how you perceive your own. So now that we've identified some of the most common situations where presence matters, whether you're in leadership yet or not, let's explore how you can build the kind of executive presence that feels real, not rehearsed. So these strategies are aligned with the 5 elements of the POISE framework and can be practiced in everyday moments. No promotion required. So we're going to start with presence of mind, and I have 2 tools, the 3-second pause and name the signal check-in. So with the 3-second pause, it's just that. In meetings or high-stake conversations, we're going to pause for 3 seconds, and this is going to show that before we respond, we have this emotional control and thoughtfulness. It's especially powerful when you feel defensive or pressured. We just pause before we respond, 3 seconds, and then move. Now, tool 2 is called Name the Signal Check-In. When we feel thrown off, whether it's before a big presentation or we're in a tough conversation, we're going to ask ourselves some questions. Am I leading from a place of anxiety or alignment? How can I ground myself? This helps us shift from autopilot to intention. Now, let's move to ownership of voice. And our 2 tools here are drop the disclaimer and the headline message. So the first one, drop the disclaimer. We're going to start to notice when we start minimizing our own ideas. So instead of, "I'm not sure this is right, but I'm going to say something like, one perspective I'd like to consider is," and then you're going to give your idea. It's a small shift, but it has a big presence impact. The second one is the headline method. I'm going to say the most important point first, and then I'm going to back it up, because this helps your voice land clearly in fast-paced rooms and makes it easier for others to follow your leadership. Now let's move to intentional energy. The 2 tools here, presence hygiene and energy recalibration phrase. So presence hygiene, before you hit join the meeting or walk into a room, we're going to check those things that sometimes erode our confidence. Check our posture, shoulders back, chin up, straighten out your clothes. How's your breath? Check your energy. Ask, what do I want people to feel from me in this space? So then you can reset as needed, because presence is a frequency that you set. Now, tool 2 is our energy recalibration phrase. I'm going to use grounding phrases to bring people and myself back into focus. Let's slow down and get a clear picture on what matters most here. I want to make sure we're not overlooking something important. Now, signature style. 2 tools, define your authentic aesthetic and posture rehearsal. We went over this in our last training as well. Remember the power pose? So tool 1 is define your leadership aesthetic. Pick 3 words that you want your presence to communicate. For example, approachable, bold, thoughtful. Then choose attire, posture, and expression that align with those words, not with outdated leadership molds. This is all in how you see yourself and how you want the world to see you. Tool 2 is that posture rehearsal. Stand up, rehearse introducing yourself to a group. Record it. Are you shrinking? Are you fidgeting? Are you rushing? Try again with grounded posture and a clear voice. This isn't vanity, it's visibility. This is power. Practice your power. And finally, empathetic authority. We have 2 tools, boundary with warmth and validate and learn. So starting with boundaries with warmth, we're going to practice phrases like, I'd like to return to my earlier point, or I hear that, and I'd like to offer a different take. These hold space and assert your perspective without shutting down others or creating defensiveness. Now, tool 2, validate and learn, acknowledge the room, then guide it. For example, I know tensions are high. Let's take a step back and realign. This helps us build respect and trust, even across difference. So which of the poise elements feels most natural to you right now? And which one feels like a stretch? Let's explore the myths and misconceptions about executive presence, what we've been told and what we need to unlearn. Because executive presence is often treated like a mysterious X factor, something you either have or you don't. But much of that mystery comes from a history of exclusion, outdated definitions, unspoken rules, and performance-based expectations that were never built with everyone in mind. To lead with authenticity, we have to challenge the myths that shape how we see ourselves and how others judge us. So let's start with myth 1. You either have presence or you don't. The truth is, executive presence is not a personality trait. It's a skill set. You don't need to be extroverted or charismatic to have presence. Some of the most powerful leaders are quiet, calm, and thoughtful. Presence can be practiced, refined, and strengthened over time. You build it by being intentional, not by being loud. When have you mistaken presence for personality? How might your own strengths reflect a quieter version of presence? Myth 2. Presence means being in control at all times. The truth is, real presence is grounded, not rigid. Holding space doesn't mean controlling the room. It means being fully present in it. You can lead with vulnerability and still command respect. In fact, research shows that when leaders own uncertainty with confidence and say things like, let me think about that, I'm unsure, it actually builds credibility, not weakness. So have you ever respected someone more because they showed humility, paused, or admitted what they didn't know? Myth number 3. You have to sound and act like the men at the top. The truth is, mimicking someone else's leadership style often dilutes your impact. Trying to blend in with dominant norms might help you get by, but it won't help you stand out. You don't need to change who you are. You need to lead from who you are. Executive presence is most powerful when it's rooted in alignment, not performance. When have you edited or softened your voice to fit in? What would it look like if you stopped doing that? Myth number 4. Presence is mostly about how you look. The truth is, presence is communicated through posture, tone, behavior, energy, and words, not just clothes or grooming. Yes, how you show up visually matters, but not because of fashion. It's about intentionality. Are you showing up in a way that reflects your message, your values, and your role? You don't need to conform to someone else's style guide. You need to own yours. So think of a leader that you admire, whose presence is powerful. Even if it doesn't match conventional style norms, What makes that person's presence more memorable? And finally, myth number 5. If you have presence, people will always listen. Unfortunately, the truth is that presence opens doors, but bias still shapes who gets heard. You can speak with clarity, lead with empathy, and still be talked over. You can still be dismissed, and you can still be underestimated. That's not a failure on your part. It's a signal that systems still need to evolve. Presence is powerful, but it's not a shield. This is why we advocate, amplify, and support one another. What helps you stay grounded in your worth, even when your voice is overlooked? To fully develop your executive presence, you have to release these myths that hold you back. Presence doesn't require perfection. It requires clarity. It doesn't demand performance. It asks for alignment. And it isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully you. So before we move into real-world leadership examples, let's take a few minutes to check in with ourselves. So you've just explored what presence really is and how it shows up in everyday moments. Now it's time to pause, reflect, and get honest about where you're currently strong and where you want to grow. So if you have a notepad by you or you have a journal, this is a great time to pause. Take a quiet moment to reflect on the 5 questions that I'm going to ask. The first is presence of mind. When pressure hits, how do I typically respond? Do I stay calm and composed, or do I tend to rush, shut down, or over-explain? How well do I regulate my emotions in challenging moments? Am I strong here? Am I somewhat consistent? Or do I need attention in this area? Question number 2, ownership of voice. How confidently do I express my ideas? Do I use language that shows belief in my own expertise? Do I downplay, hedge, or avoid taking space? Let's rate ourselves here. Strong? Somewhat consistent? Does this need attention? Question 3, intentional energy. What kind of energy do I bring into a room or a Zoom? Do I project clarity and confidence, or does my presence feel scattered or tense? How do others experience my presence? I'm going to rate myself here: strong, somewhat consistent, or needs attention. Question number 4, signature style. Does how I show up reflect who I am as a leader? Do my clothing and posture and expressions align with how I want to be seen? Am I intentional, not performative, in how I present myself? Go ahead and rate yourself: strong, somewhat consistent, needs attention. Final question, empathetic authority. Do I lead with bold strength and care? Can I set boundaries while also holding space for others? Do people feel both challenged and supported in my presence? Strong here, somewhat consistent, or needs attention? Did you have some areas of growth in your check-in? Which of the poise areas feel like your current superpower? Which one feels like your next opportunity to grow? Write these down, because that's your presence practicing how it's going to start out. So it's important to note where you're already strong and where you need to be growing. That's where we start. So it's time for our female leader spotlight. Today we have Erin Hyder, and she shows us how we can lead with quiet certainty. Erin Hyder doesn't walk into a room to be the loudest voice. She walks in to create space for voices that often go unheard. And as the assistant city manager for the City of Durango, Colorado, Erin leads with a presence that's easy to miss if you're only looking for the traditional cues, commanding posture, big gestures, dominating conversation. But spend 5 minutes with her and you'll realize her leadership runs deep. She doesn't perform authority, she embodies it. Erin's executive presence is rooted in what she describes as humble inquiry and intentional listening. In meetings, she pays close attention to what's not being said. She invites reflection before reaction, and she holds herself and her team to practice slowing down long enough to ask, hey, what's the real challenge here? This is what presence of mind and empathetic authority look like in action. And early in her leadership journey, Erin found herself observing leaders who moved fast, who spoke often, and who filled every silence. For a while, she questioned whether her own more reflective style would be seen as strong enough. But over time, she realized that her ability to center others without disappearing herself was not a weakness, it was a superpower. She says, I realized my job wasn't to have all the answers, she says. It was to ask better questions and give people the space to think through the hard stuff. That ability to create psychological safety without needing the spotlight is a rare kind of executive presence. It's quiet, it's composed, and it invites trust. Erin is also a firm believer in intentional systems thinking. She's not reactive, she's responsive. Her leadership presence doesn't spike in moments of crisis, it deepens. Colleagues often describe her as the calm in the chaos. That's not accidental, it's cultivated. Today, Erin mentors other women in leadership and encourages them to stop measuring their impact by volume or visibility. Instead, she asks, what does your presence make possible for others? That single question redefines the room. We celebrate you, Erin.
I don't know. Sometimes we hear women and leaders, we hear the contradiction, like, I need you to have a presence. And on the other side, we hear, but you're too much. And I think sometimes I can be, for some folks, too much. And I've realized that, like, I have to embrace who I am and not change my approach based on how that makes other people feel. Of course, as it's delivered in an appropriate, meaningful, and productive way.
I am so beyond thrilled to introduce you to our male ally spotlight, Joey Aviles. I met Joey last year at a conference. This guy is amazing. He leads from plentitude, and we will learn more about that momentarily. But with Joey's story, he didn't just step into leadership. He had to break through bias, assumptions, and invisible scripts every step of the way. He grew up in San Sebastian, Puerto Rico, where salsa music and rice and beans and strong family roots shaped his earliest values. When he arrived in the continental U.S. to pursue a federal government internship, he only knew 3 words in English: yes, no, and hello. What he didn't expect, though, was to encounter something he'd never been taught to name: being minoritized. In Puerto Rico, he had never been called a minority, but the moment he arrived in the U.S., the labels began to stack: Hispanic, millennial, accented, large-bodied, and he felt the weight of how identity can distort perception. He was no longer just Joey. He was every assumption someone made about what he was, what he wasn't, or was supposed to be. But Joey didn't shrink. He showed up. He learned to lead not by conforming, but by getting clearer and more grounded in who he was. And eventually he rose to become the first chief of diversity and inclusion for one of the largest commands in the Coast Guard. Still, even at the top, he wasn't immune to bias. At a national women's leadership conference where he was the keynote speaker, Joey walked into the venue early like most of us speakers do. He's got his bow tie on, he's got his materials in hand. And before he could even introduce himself, one of the staff members approached him and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here. Please go find the tables and chairs because the keynote's arriving soon." She thought he was hotel staff because he was Hispanic. And so in that moment, Joey felt that sting that many of us know too well, that feeling of being erased and misread or seen only through the lens of stereotype. He walked away quietly. He just was so taken aback that he didn't quite have the tools in that moment to respond. But later, when he took the stage, he had a standing ovation. And he didn't let that moment define him, but he never forgot it. So today, Joey teaches leaders to find what he calls plentitude, a state of internal calm and clarity where you no longer feel like you need to cover or overcompensate or seek external validation. From that place, you don't lead to be accepted. You lead because you are aligned. Plenitude, Joey says, is where you realize you're enough and you stop letting the external noise edit your brilliance. Joey's story reminds us that executive presence doesn't come from performance, it comes from purpose. And it's most powerful when it's rooted in the decision to show up fully, even when the world tries to shrink you. So thank you, Joey.
We all have our own way to manage and solve problems. We all have our own ways to innovate and to address a specific challenge with our uniqueness. That's what I'm talking about, creativity and innovation. And when we put barriers on the way we show up because we are often covering, we are often editing what we say, what we don't say, or if I'm gonna be judged, or if I'm gonna be deemed as too aggressive, or too loud, or perhaps too emotional. That gets in the way of your unique version of executive presence. Now, I have several examples, Dr. Jolene, and I just wanna showcase two for our audience. One comes from a highly successful senior executive who happened to be a woman, global chief marketing officer. She told me in one of my coaching sessions and trainings that I did for her entire marketing staff, she said, "Joey, I started succeeding in my career as a chief marketing officer when I stopped covering and continuously editing my responses." And here's what I mean, because it's very important to make a distinction. Of course, you want to show up and be polished and all of that. That's not the discussion. That's basic leadership lessons there. What I'm talking about is editing your unique solutions because you are afraid of how you're going to be perceived. That's what I'm talking about. And when she stopped constantly covering, editing what she said or what she thought, she started succeeding. And here's why. And perhaps many of you have experienced this in your career. You are in a heated discussion with fellow leaders in the room, and you have this idea in your brain, and you're like, do I share it or not? And then you decide to stay quiet when all of a sudden, another person in the room jumps in and shares a similar idea, but between you and me, your idea was better. But then yet, we stayed quiet. And as she shared that experience with me, is every time we let that internal covering get in the way of what we truly think and what we believe is the right way forward, we walk ourselves back in our career, in our advancement, and in our chances to lead.
Now, executive presence is often influenced by deeply embedded cultural norms. What's seen as confident in one culture might be viewed as arrogant or disrespectful or even passive in another. As we build our own presence, it's essential to recognize that leadership doesn't always wear the same face or speak the same tone. So here's how executive presence is understood in 3 different cultural contexts. In the Japanese culture, present isn't demonstrated through bold speech or personal spotlight. It's communicated through restraint, careful listening, and group harmony. Leaders are often expected to understate their achievements, defer to elders or seniority, and avoid confrontation in public spaces. Even posture and tone are carefully moderated to reflect humility and collective focus. In global contexts, silence can be power. Confidence doesn't always raise its voice. Executive presence may be quiet, but deeply respected. German leadership norms prize directness, expertise, and logic. Executive presence in this context often hinges on being well prepared, succinct, and able to defend your position with facts, not flair. Polish and poise matter, but they are in service of credibility, not charm. Over-embellishment or excessive charisma can be seen as a lack of seriousness or depth. And in some cultures, confidence is measured not by how you carry yourself, but by the depth of what you know and how precisely you express it. In many Latin American countries, strong relationships are central to leadership. Executive presence is often tied to relational energy, storytelling, emotional attunement, and cultural expressiveness. A leader who creates trust through warmth and familiarity can carry great authority, even without dominating a room. Hierarchies exist, but presence is personal. Presence isn't just about how you stand, it's about how you make others feel. An emotional connection is a source of power. Have you ever worked across cultures or with people from different regions? How did expectations around presence differ? And what surprised you? Presence isn't a performance, it's a practice. Throughout this training, we've explored what executive presence really means, beyond the outdated molds and surface level expectations. You've reflected on the moments that shaped your presence. You've examined the myths that hold so many of us back. You've learned the poise framework and heard real stories from leaders who lead not because they conform, but because they connect. And now it's your turn. Presence isn't something you master overnight. It's something you build in small, everyday choices you make. When you speak up, when you take a pause, when you stop apologizing for taking up space, and when you remind yourself, I belong in this room. So let's look at our key takeaways from this session. Executive presence isn't about performance, it's about alignment. Presence is shaped by how you think, speak, carry yourself, and lead others. Bias and outdated norms distort how presence is judged, especially for women. The poise framework gives you a modern, authentic approach to presence because we stay grounded, speak with clarity, lead with intention, show up with purpose. That small shifts in daily moments build real visibility and influence. And the most powerful presence is the one that doesn't shrink or perform, but leads from truth. So now it's time for this week's challenge. I'd like you to choose one element of the poise framework to practice intentionally over the next 7 days. So here are a few small ways that you could start. The first one being presence of mind. Maybe try the 3-second pause in your next high-stakes moment. Notice how it changes your tone. With ownership of voice, maybe rephrase one idea without a disclaimer or hedge. Just say it. Intentional energy. Walk into your next meeting or pop onto your next Zoom with a clear, calm posture. Virtual or in person, bring that intentional energy. Signature style. Choose an outfit or a gesture that reflects how you want to show up, not what's expected. empathetic authority. Set a boundary or express a firm opinion while still honoring the relationship. The key here is to write it down, commit to it, and if you're part of a support network like the Women's Leadership Support Network, pop on in there and talk about it. Jump into a discussion group. Share it. Talk about this. This is your growth. This is your presence. Now let's take one final moment before we wrap up. I'd like you to ask yourself, what's the most surprising thing that I learned about presence today? Where have I been hiding or holding back, and why? What belief or behavior am I ready to rewrite? What version of leadership am I finally ready to step into? I hope you found this empowering. Jot down your reactions to your closing reflection. Take time this week to review it. It's time to establish your executive presence. Executive presence isn't about sounding like someone else, dressing like someone else, or leading like someone else. It's about being so deeply aligned with who you are and what you bring that others can feel your clarity before you even say a word. You are already enough. Now it's time to lead from that place with poise. If this training spoke to you, please share it. Forward it to a colleague, post it on LinkedIn, or send the link to someone who needs this message. The more people who subscribe to the YouTube channel, the more accessible this training becomes for women who've been told to dim their light or to doubt their worth. And if you're looking for connection beyond the screen, we've created 2 powerful spaces for you. The Women's Leadership Support Network, open to all genders, where you can engage in open conversations, share insights, and support rising leaders. You can go to the QR code here for access into the Women's Leadership Support Network. And then there's the Inner Circle. This is a confidential space for women to process real challenges, build deep trust, and grow in community. You don't have to lead alone. You just have to choose to keep showing up with clarity, with courage, and with others beside you. I'll see you in training number 7, Building Your Personal Brand as a Leader. This is a session dedicated to helping you define your own and express the leadership identity that sets you apart. Until then, stay grounded, stay bold, and stay visible. The room is already yours. See you soon.